Welcome to the regular meeting of the Fairfield Planning Commission for August 23rd, 2017. Can we please have the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Wesley? Present. Commissioner Cohn? Present. Commissioner Branch? Here. Commissioner Pattis? Commissioner Walker?
Here.
Commissioner McDonald?
Here.
Commissioner Geiger?
Here. Commissioner Pattis, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you for coming. There are speaker cards in the lobby area that have to be filled out by anyone who would like to speak on an item under public comment or scheduled matters. Speakers may address items on this agenda at the time each item is considered. Speakers will each be given 3 minutes to speak. Please pass the card up to us before the time for public comments on the item. Next is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Motion by Commissioner Cohn, second by Commissioner Branch. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Next is approval of the minutes. Any changes to the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes of August 9, 2017.
Motion by Commissioner Walker, second by Commissioner Pattis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Public comments. This is the time for the public to speak on items not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. Items from the public that are not part of the agenda will be taken under consideration without discussion or action by the Commission, but may be referred to staff. I'll now open up the public comment period, and I have one speaker card from Alvina Sheely. Would you like to come up? One on your left.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Dr. Alvina Sheely, and I'm coming before you tonight to speak in relationship to the downtown rehabilitation or revamping of what's going on there. It's a related item, but it's not the zoning. It came to my mind that there are no disability parking spots downtown. The one that is behind the grass that's owned by the county, that parking lot there's two in there. But if you have a disability and you need to park close to a building, you don't get one. Okay, you're not privileged. There are people, the truncated areas where the wheelchairs can go down, the yellow truncated spots, okay, that's for them. But somebody who needs a cane, or somebody who has neuropathy in their feet, it's painful to walk, and they have disability placards in their car or on their license, so they don't have any privilege to get accommodations for their disability. So when you are working on this plan for downtown, I hope that you will make note of that and make sure that the people that have disabilities will have some place to park. And I know there's some down at Chez Soul restaurant, but there's this parking lot over here, and Chez Soul's a long way away. And I hope that you'll consider the people that have disabilities other than in wheelchairs who use the truncated spots to cross the street. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Now I'll close the public comment period. Next item on the agenda is scheduled matters. For each item, there will first be a presentation by city staff. Then I'll open the public hearing and call out the names of members of the public who have filled out speaker cards to come to the podium to speak.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to step down since I live and own property in downtown Fairfield.
Okay.
Or recuse myself is the correct language.
As you're speaking, a red light will flash to indicate that your 3 minutes are up. I'll then close the public hearing. The Planning Commission will deliberate on the item and may have additional questions of staff. The Commission will then vote on the item. The one item today is item A, a continued public hearing regarding the 2017 Heart of Fairfield zoning ordinance amendments. Our staff person is Brian Miller.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Purpose of this public hearing tonight is to review and provide comments and recommendations on the proposed Heart of Fairfield zoning ordinance and zoning map amendments that are presented by staff. This is a complicated item. We've not written a whole new chapter of our zoning ordinance in 16 years. So this is a good opportunity for comments and suggestions and corrections that you feel need to be made at this time. Of course, as with all of our zoning ordinance, there will be further opportunity. There will be corrections and updates over the forthcoming years, as we do during our normal process for updating and correcting our zoning ordinance. Of course, the second main point of tonight is to receive public comments on the zoning ordinance. And then finally, we're asking for a recommendation to City Council on the proposed zoning ordinance amendments. This can include, of course, changes to the staff recommendations, additions, and corrections as needed. What is the purpose of the zoning ordinance update itself? As we all know, the City Council adopted the Heart of Fairfield plan in May of 2017. This is a new vision, a new plan that summarizes many of the goals, objectives, and ideas for the revitalization and strengthening of the downtown core, as well as adjoining residential areas, and then we cannot forget the West Texas Street corridor. Our zoning ordinance must be consistent under state law with the general plan. This action tonight will bring the zoning ordinance into consistency with the Heart of Fairfield plan, which is an element of the general plan. The zoning ordinance will also, once adopted, provide a guide for developers, businesses, and property owners in planning for the use of their property. As with all zoning, it will define what kinds of uses are allowed or not allowed, or allowed with a conditional use permit, and the standards for development in the zoning ordinance. And the third key point of this triad is to provide direction to planning staff and city staff in general in implementing the plan and implementing the zoning ordinance. So those are the three key goals or purposes for the zoning ordinance update tonight. Just a reminder, there's a vision that the City Council approved after public comment and planning commission input and input from the community. The Heart of Fairfield is the social, economic, and cultural center for Fairfield, a distinct destination that attracts the community through thoughtful design, desired shopping and dining, lively activities, ranges of housing, and convenient access to regional transit. It's the place where residents, workers, visitors, tourists, and people from all over Fairfield and the region come to meet, gather, thrive, and celebrate community milestones. That's a pretty broad and positive vision, and the challenge, of course, is actually developing a zoning ordinance and an implementation plan, which will also be coming to the City Council and Planning Commission later, to actually implement that vision and those goals within that vision statement. Just a reminder from the plan document, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for an attractive, fun, vibrant downtown, and the housing and neighborhoods and employment uses to support this kind of vibrant downtown center. The way this zoning ordinance is organized is we're creating a brand new section. Similar to all of our sections, we have in the existing zoning ordinance, we have a residential section, which is 25.2. We have a commercial section, we have an industrial, etc. We're creating a brand new section for the Heart of Fairfield zoning, section 25.23. And as with other zoning chapters or sections, we will define new zoning districts. We will have a land use table, which defines allowed uses and permit requirements. And finally, there will be general development regulations. As you'll see, this zoning ordinance, while following a similar structure to the rest of the code, does have some unique characteristics to it that reflect the Heart of Fairfield plan and some of the things we're trying to do in the downtown and West Texas Street areas. We'll talk about zoning districts first. The zoning district bound are basically guided by the Heart of Fairfield plan land use diagram. As you can see here, you basically have the downtown core. You have transition area with a mixture of office and residential uses to the north and south of the downtown core area. You have our traditional mixed single family and apartment residential district to the south of the mixed office use. Then, of course, you have the county government center here. And then in this area, there's a new transit-oriented development area neighborhood that we're proposing to see the transition of the mixture of smaller buildings, vacant lots, and underutilized properties in this area near the Sassoon Fairfield train station, just across the walkway here. In West Texas Street, we're kind of taking a broad brush approach here. We're creating a mixed-use West Texas Street corridor for urban development of a mixed-use residential and commercial character, with commercial uses concentrated primarily along West Texas Street itself and transitioning to more of a residential use to the rear and above. We have some zones we're not changing. We're not changing the rec zoning on Allenwood Park. We're not changing at this time the highway-oriented and regional and community commercial areas at the west end of West Texas Street. We're not really changing at this time as well the commercial service area along Highway 12, nor can we change the county government center public facility designation here. We are giving a special unique designation to the Fairfield Transportation Center and the future planned parking garage that's under design now. Associated with that land use diagram are new zoning districts. We're using H as the prefix for all of the Heart of Fairfield unique zoning districts. Downtown core will parallel to some extent our existing zoning designations. We're called HD and HDC. We have a West Texas Street mixed use area, which is HWT. Mixed use office residential, we're giving an HO designation. That new transit village I mentioned earlier is HTD. The residential downtown neighborhood in the south downtown area is HR, and public facilities parking garage will be given HPF. And as I mentioned, there are several other zones within the map boundaries of the Heart of Fairfield plan where we are not changing the zoning, and the existing zoning code will continue to apply. This rezoning map shows the changes we're making. I will point out a couple interesting things. We are, of course, replacing the CMP with our new HO. We're again having our downtown core and downtown in the pink and the red, and in the residential area you can see to the orange to the rear, and then finally the high density transit village land is to the bottom right corner. This then shows the central area, which is West Texas Street, which is mostly going to Heart of Fairfield West Texas Street mixed use, but also some of our residential zoning in this area. And finally, this is the remainder of the West Texas Street area. And again, you can see that we're not changing significantly the area on the map. Associated with these land uses, or these zoning districts, I should say, are allowed uses and permit requirements. We have new tables, very similar to in structure to the existing zoning tables. And there's some goals and objectives I want to point out. Again, we're looking for an active, pedestrian-friendly retail restaurant and an entertainment district on Texas Street proper. We're looking to encourage the transition of West Texas Street to a mixed-use corridor with more residential, more of an urban building form, 2-3-story buildings instead of the 1-story with parking lot kind of environment that we have right now. We're also looking to protect the existing downtown residential neighborhood. I mentioned already the transit-oriented higher density residential neighborhood proposed for the train station, which is definitely a long-term goal for the city. And I might point out there are going to be limitations on certain uses, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. Just a quick view of a downtown environment. We all know what they look like, and we all agree that active downtown environment, like you see at the eastern hello, there we go. At the eastern end of downtown Texas Street right now, with the pizza parlor and the sandwich shop and the Starbucks, we want to see more of that in the rest of downtown, and eventually, as redevelopment occurs on West Texas Street, in that area as well. Transit neighborhood, this is a very high density example, and we'd like to see some unique high-density housing be provided in the transit village setting near the train station. There are some issues with land uses that have come up during the process. This was a 2-year public process. There were a lot of issues and goals and objectives that were raised, some of which were incorporated into the vision statement I read at the beginning of the presentation. Other issues are more complicated to deal with. Step back? Okay. How's this? Okay. There are a couple issues, however, that are rather complicated to deal with, and I wanted to focus on them tonight because they are of such concern to the public. What we heard from many members of the public, neighbors, business owners, property owners, etc., was that there's a high concentration of social service agencies which attract a clientele which they are concerned for public safety reasons, for business attractiveness reasons, are not good for the downtown. Unfortunately, we cannot separate out the social service agencies as a separate land use. In our existing zoning code and the proposed zoning code, we treat them as office or medical office uses. The American with Disabilities Act protects many of the client groups served by social service agencies, and we can't discriminate against protected groups under the law. We would be subject to lawsuits. There are some things we can do. At least on Texas Street proper, one idea that we're proposing is to restrict office uses on Texas Street on the first floor in the core downtown. In other words, we will no longer be permitting office uses on Texas Street proper for the first floor. We want to preserve that Texas Street frontage for active restaurant, retail, and entertainment uses. We cannot prevent office uses, social service agencies entirely, though, in the downtown area, because that would mean we would have to prevent all office uses. We would not be able to allow doctors, we would not be able to allow lawyers, accountants, the kind of office tenants that we want and populate our downtown and also support many of our downtown businesses. We can restrict them on Texas Street proper, and we're also making a minor change to what we presented to you in your packet, to prohibit office uses in the residential area, to make it clear that we want to preserve that area for residential uses, not office uses, and certainly not for social service office uses as well. But again, office uses will continue to be permitted elsewhere in downtown and on West Texas Street, but we are attempting to keep them away from our main retail, restaurant, and entertainment core. Another issue that's been raised by some members of the public is churches. Churches are permitted in many of our zones under the existing zoning and also under the new Heart of Fairfield zoning. Churches get into issues of religious freedom, and it's difficult to regulate churches. We have never taken a position where we require a use permit for a church. We regulate churches like we do all assembly uses, and that legally is the approach we're going to have to continue to take. Just a quick look at the church situation. Churches are permitted in all areas except the downtown core first floor, which is highlighted in the box, and we're recommending the transit village area. I also might point out that churches are not permitted in the existing CR regional commercial zone at the far western side of the corridor as well. So we are going to be recommending tonight, and it's on the sheet of paper before you, that churches not be a permitted use in the TOD, the transit village area. It's not really appropriate for an area where we want high density residential uses associated with transit. Offices, again, as I mentioned, we're not permitting office uses of any type on the Texas Street corridor frontage. We're also recommending, as I mentioned, that we remove office uses from the RM, the medium density residential neighborhood to the south, with the objective of protecting that residential neighborhood. So that's a change that's also on the sheet in front of you tonight. West Texas Street also has some land use issues that will require a transition over time. We're recommending limitations on auto-oriented uses in favor of more mixed uses. In other words, no auto sales or car repair. Self-storage would not be a permitted use. And I might also point out that our intent with West Texas Street zoning is that commercial uses be tied to the West Texas Street frontage. The intent is not necessarily to expand commercial uses well into residential areas to the rear. That may be unclear in the table, but we have put a clear note in the table to make it clear that the commercial uses are intended for the West Texas Street frontage. The third section of the new 25.23 is the general development regulations. These are based on some of the Heart of Fairfield design guidelines, which are a rather unique species of design guidelines in that they look at buildings a little differently than our standard approach does. So what we had to do is take some of the design guidelines in the plan document itself and turn them into actual zoning ordinance language. The goal, of course, is the right kind of development that fits in with the rest of the community, that avoids some of the problems we've seen even in recent downtown projects. What's unusual about the Heart of Fairfield zone development regulations is we're regulating by building types rather than just by zone. Non-residential buildings, mixed-use buildings, multifamily buildings, and single-family homes, as well as a few minor specific standards for the parking garage. So we have new tables for each of these building types rather than by zone. As with other zoning tables, the development regulations tables, though, we do cover two basic subject areas: site planning, as one would expect, density, lot area, dimensions, landscaping, the standard stuff for site planning that you as a commission would review and that we as staff would look at as well. And of course, building design itself, building height, habitable floors, streetscape interface, and setbacks. There are some unique or new guidelines based on the Heart of Fairfield concept that we're recommending at this time, though. Transparencies. We want open facades with plentiful windows and doors, even on West Texas Street, but especially on Texas Street downtown. We're not recommending that we permit blank walls that have no access for pedestrians, no visual access for people along the corridor. Transparency is a key goal of these development standards. Related to that, front pedestrian access from the street. We don't want, again, a blank wall with no doorways, especially in the downtown area, but also in West Texas Street commercial districts. We're trying to push increasingly parking to the rear or side rather than having a large parking lot out front. Parking should not be the dominant part of the streetscape. Limits on garage frontages. In new housing in the downtown area in particular, we're trying to avoid new housing that's an entire wall of garages. Outdoor dining and activity zones downtown. We have specific notes in the table recommending that all new restaurants in the downtown district provide outdoor dining areas or some kind of interface with the street. An example of that doesn't go the typical route of tables and chairs on the sidewalk is the new Thai restaurant, for example, has fully opening windows that really have an interesting way of bringing Texas Street into the restaurant and vice versa, and we want to see that. Some of finally, I'm pointing out that some of the setback requirements may seem a little odd. Part of the reason for that is we're trying to tie those setbacks to the ultimate right-of-way if and when we're able to fund reconstruction of West Texas Street. The road diet with better sidewalks, landscaping, bicycle lanes, etc., does result in some changes to the width of the street, and we want the new building setbacks to reflect that. There are other amendments required. There's a comprehensive zoning ordinance cleanup that requires changing a lot of the cross-references to some of the zoning that we're eliminating by the new Heart of Fairfield zoning. For example, there's a new table 25-9, which is the commercial land use table, and the development standards table 25-10 that are completely replaced because we're removing all the references to those two columns, CD and CDC, and as well, so that's a completely new table, and as well as the footnotes within that. And there are a variety of cross-references within the code and sections that discuss downtown issues that are now addressed by the Heart of Fairfield plan that need to be cleaned up, eliminated in some cases. We're also moving toward a shorter non-conforming uses standard for non-conforming uses in the plan area. We're going for 90 days, subject to negotiation depending on the specific situations of the property owner. As I mentioned, we are recommending some minor changes to the land use table based on what we'd originally proposed to you. We're removing office from the permitted uses in the HR zone. We're removing churches from the permitted uses in the HTZ zone, and we're permitting churches on the second floor of the Heart of Fairfield core zone to reflect that conferences and banquet halls are already permitted on the second floor as well. And we can certainly entertain any other changes as well. Environmental review. An EIR was prepared for the Heart of Fairfield plan and approved by the City Council. The zoning implements the plan, and it's thus in conformance with the plan and with the California Environmental Quality Act, and no additional CEQA review is necessary. Your actions tonight, we're asking you to adopt a resolution that does two things. It recommends the City Council amend the Fairfield zoning ordinance to bring into consistency with the Heart of Fairfield plan, and it also recommends zone changes to assign appropriate zoning for the Heart of Fairfield plan area. And with that, I will take any questions.
Before we take questions, if I can, Brian, if you can go back a couple of slides, I want to make sure the commission understands specifically. You had a recommendation before you with your staff report. There's an ordinance. There's a resolution with a proposed ordinance. There are, on the sheet in front of you, there are some changes to the packet as far as what staff is recommending. And Brian, if you could just again, so that the commission fully understands, if you make a motion to go with the staff recommendation, we would ask that you go with that recommendation with the changes shown on the sheet in front of you.
You didn't get one? I missed
So,
you. I apologize.
Brian, yeah, before we go to questions, if you can just walk through that table and make sure that they understand.
Yeah, in the table, at the top, you'll notice some banks and office uses are highlighted under the HR. That we are removing. That's a strikeout. That from the HR zone. Again, that zone's primarily intended as a residential zone, and we should not have included the office uses in that zone. Similar in churches, in the middle column under HTC, to be consistent with how we treat other assembly uses, we're permitting churches on the second and third or above floors. And we're also removing it from the HTD, which is that transit village area where, again, we're trying to encourage higher density housing near the train station.
Thank you.
There is. It's small type and it's hard to read. Yeah, the HR ones are all strikeouts.
Those are to be strict, and so that banks and offices wouldn't be allowed uses in the HR. So the proposal is not to include them. Yes. All right. So with that, we'll turn it over to you for your question.
Right. Do any commissioners have any initial questions for staff? Perry?
Yeah, with regard to trying to have less auto repair, auto sales on West Texas and Texas, what about all the places that are there now? You said over a period of time it'll transition. Are they going to lose their license? Or?
No, existing non-conforming uses, as with any change in zoning, would be allowed to remain. Adopting the new zoning does not mean that the existing uses have to leave. Now, if they want to expand or move to a new location, then they would no longer be consistent with the West Texas Street zoning. But existing uses are not being kicked out.
Have you heard from any of these people? Are they aware of that?
One of the property owners did call me, and I told her exactly what I just told you.
Commissioner Cohn?
In correlation with that, would that include offices that we're talking about, not having office on the first floor in the West Texas or the Texas Street?
Existing office uses, of course, would be allowed to continue to remain. New office uses being established on the first floor would not be permitted by the downtown core or downtown zoning on Texas Street. There are buildings and blocks in those zones, however, that are not facing on Texas Street where you could establish office uses, just not on Texas Street proper.
And do you know offhand how many currently offices spaces there are on Texas Street?
There's about a dozen, because there's the 1,000 block, the white single-story brick building, and then there's a couple office uses on Texas Street, and then there's a TAMF, which is across from the I don't know the exact number, but it's about a dozen.
Okay. And then, what if a business, or person for that matter, purchased a building on Texas Street, unknowing what we're changing here, potentially changing, and had intentions of putting office space on their first floor? How does that apply?
Well, I mean, as with any change in zoning, I mean, this is a legislative act. We would have, I mean, expectations for continuation of existing use or existing permitted uses is not something we can guarantee with any purchase of the building. There are many uses still permitted under the zoning, and associated with the plan, I didn't mention it in my presentation, but there will also be incentives for new uses and new development in the Texas Street corridor in particular. For example, the City Council just authorized a facade improvement grant that could be used for restaurant type uses, retail type uses. So that would be an incentive or some funding for that property owner to transition his building to a restaurant or retail or entertainment type use.
Okay. And then, since I've got it here, and I'll just keep going if you don't mind. You put in the report we got that there was a public workshop on July 17th, and you guys reached out to the Fairfield Main Street Association. What was the feedback you got on this?
General support. I mean, we worked very closely with the Main Street Association during the development of this plan. I think there are some concerns, particularly with regards to, as we would suggest, the office uses. And our goal in developing the implementation plan for the Heart of Fairfield plan is to provide incentives and mechanisms that make up for a potential loss of one particular kind of land use. In general, they were very supportive and continue to be supportive of the efforts of the plan.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pattis?
Oh, sorry. I know we're trying to discourage parking on Texas, which I agree, but has there been any thought to what Dr. Shuey was saying before about the disabled or handicap parking availability?
That's not specifically a zoning issue, but as part of the Heart of Fairfield plan, there are action items to improve existing city parking lots and improve existing parking situations on the street. One of the concepts, for example, would be to look at diagonal parking on some test blocks. In that case, in that kind of situation, we could include disabled parking as part of that design. On West Texas Street, where you're still going to have you might still have some larger retail or commercial buildings, and you would still have parking requirements that are fairly substantial. The existing building code would require the disabled parking for those private parking lots, just like we do now.
Commissioner Branch?
Yeah, I just have a question about a new zoning. Like anything else, of course, will there be amendments to that or anticipated amendments as we go along?
Yes, as with our normal standard zoning ordinance, we periodically, generally annually, but sometimes more often, look at issues that come up with the zoning, and we bring packages. We typically will package many issues together and bring them to the Planning Commission and City Council. This is something new, so we definitely anticipate that there will be need for tweaks and changes over the next few months, next couple years. So and that will of course be brought to the Planning Commission before it's taken to the City Council, and you will have an opportunity to comment at that time.
Yeah, we certainly don't want you to adopt or recommend that this be adopted thinking once this is adopted, this is set in stone and cannot be changed if we identify issues that need to be addressed.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns because I can see where there would be a possibility that there will have to be some amendments.
Yes.
And if we approve it tonight and say this is the final product, we need room for amendments and flexibility.
Yep.
We agree.
If we see things that aren't working, or if the commission identifies things that aren't working with this, we'll have plenty of opportunities to come back to you for that to be relooked at and fresh recommendations to the City Council for changes.
And one other question, I think it was already asked, but have this new zoning been presented to the business owners and people in downtown, or what is their feedback on that?
We primarily reached out to the Main Street Association at their workshop. We also published it on our website. We notified all the property owners, 500 property owners. And so it was on the website for what, 2 weeks, Dave, or a month? Yeah,
3 weeks.
about 3 weeks.
Okay.
And we have had individual conversations with people. And at the workshop, we did have about 15 people show up, and with more out of curiosity than with specific issues. So we have tried to reach out to the public. I would also point out that our goal, to the extent possible, was to implement the Heart of Fairfield plan.
Okay.
And that was a result of a 2-year planning effort. One workshop with multiple workshops and open houses. At one point, our first workshop, for example, had 100 people show up. So, did we get everybody's issue resolved? No, we can't claim that. But we tried to listen to the extent we could, and the extent allowed by the law. I want to emphasize that. So.
You
Sure, Wesley.
mentioned
Yeah.
most likely at some point that all the social service providers would be moving to second floor operations. How many folks are we talking about? How many organizations right there in the
There's.
Texas corridor?
I should know that number. I think it's in the 20
These
range.
These folks were included
any
in the discussions with the
Any
association?
existing social service
Uh-huh.
organizations, if they are on the first floor today,
Mm-hmm.
adopting these changes to the code will not force them to move. Anyone who has a lease and wants to stay, and their landlord allows that, they can continue to stay right where they're at.
Okay.
And I might point out that the majority of the social service agencies are not on Texas Street proper. Many of them are tucked away into the true office buildings in blocks adjacent to Texas Street. Our goal, again, was to preserve Texas Street for the retail and restaurant uses and not allow a large number of new office uses to establish themselves. We did get inquiries during the preparation of this zoning. We did have a couple inquiries about new office uses on West Texas Street, and on Texas Street, and we tried to steer them, and we steered them away, basically.
And a point of clarification, you mentioned 90 days non-conforming use. Is that a change from prior non-conformance?
It's that's zoning nonconformance. So if someone abandons, if a nonconforming use moves out,
Mm-hmm.
and another nonconforming use wants to move in 2 years later, the nonconforming statute would not allow that. If they wanted to move in next week,
Right.
that nonconforming use would be still
Got
okay.
it. And is that time period a change, or is that what's always been here in town?
This is a change for the Heart of Fairfield. We have a longer time period for other districts, a year, and in some cases 2 years, depending on how the original now non-conforming use was established.
Yeah, and that's proposed by staff because we have a very specific plan that the city council adopted, that the city's gone out of its way to say this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to see. And so the idea is for this area, there should be a higher priority on making those changes. And so by proposing to reduce the amount of time for the non-conforming status, it helps facilitate that on a quicker basis.
And what was what was the non-use period right now?
Currently, it's 365 days.
Like a year. Okay.
Why do we legally need to have one at all? If you have a non-use and they move out, why let someone else do it? Is there a legal reason that you have to have a non-conforming period at all?
Yes, I mean, you don't want all existing. How do I put this? I'll defer to my.
No, what I'm saying is, if someone
the reason for putting it in there is you have uses that are not allowed. You know, let's separate from adopting changes to this code. You know, right now you have a set of regulations. There's always going to be some uses that are in place prior to adopting those regulations, and if you don't have a time period to phase them out, then you never will, for those properties, have the ability to get them to conform with the code. So by putting in a time period, it says, here's your time period in which you can continue to do what you want if you want to change from one business to the next that is still that same kind of non-conforming business. You got a relatively short window in which to bring in another activity that is a similar non-conforming use. And if you don't bring it in that period, now it's time for that property to come into conformance with the code.
I guess I don't understand. I thought that what you're saying, if someone is non-conforming and they're there, they can stay there. But if they move out, why would you let someone else then move in?
Under our current code, oh, go ahead.
This doesn't allow a new person to move in and continue the non-conforming use if the same person is in that space but then discontinues the use for a period. It's saying that
and
they
then they wanna
can't
start again.
start back up again.
Okay, I thought you were letting another person in
Well-
completely new.
You still are, I mean, yes.
Yeah, if you have an office use, for example, and that tenant leaves, under our code, whether it's 365 days or 90 days, the landlord has that period of time to find another office user in that period. And if they don't, then if it's a non-conforming use, they have to bring in a conforming use.
No, I understand. So it's the same owner, it's just a different tenant.
Correct.
I thought you
Right,
meant the
correct.
whole new person owns it. and
Or it could
moves
be the same tenant could stop operating and then decide to re-engage at that location. There's a time limit in the code that allows them to do that.
Thank
In
you.
this case, for the Heart of Fairfield, the proposal is to shorten that time period.
Any other questions?
Can I just ask one more thing? So assuming that we approve this and then it goes to city council and they approve it, what kind of time frame are you thinking until we actually see any kind of change?
Well, that's going to depend as much on market as the zoning ordinance. The market, for example, for downtown restaurants seems to be doing pretty good now. We're getting some new downtown restaurants. The hope is that over time, as you see more downtown restaurants, as you see a livelier center city, that will encourage other property owners to invest in the downtown area and bring in new uses and new buildings consistent with the new code. We can't promise that there's going to be a dramatic transformation overnight, but city staff will, as we do now, continue to work very closely with the Fairfield Main Street Association, with property owners, with realtors, to try to bring in the kind of tenants that we would like to see and buildings that we'd like to see in the heart of Fairfield. And we already do that. The Heart of Fairfield plan and the zoning ordinance provides something we can show a property owner, a developer, a potential retailer. This is the vision that the city has for the corridor. We think you fit into this vision. Here's why you should come to the city of Fairfield.
And separately, or along those same lines, concurrent with bringing the zoning to the city council, our economic development division is preparing an implementation plan for incentivizing development within the downtown. So that implementation plan would go concurrently to the council with this zoning ordinance amendment, and we expect that will help facilitate changes in new development in downtown.
Another question. So I've looked over what we have here, and I've only been on the commission a couple of meetings, but I don't see the study that led to this. I don't see the numbers that said, based upon our research, we know that if we do this, this will happen in Fairfield, other than in general we think it's going to happen. But do we have something that says, you know what, based on all the research we've done, this, and this, and this? Because I see this mostly being aspirational. Like this, if we do this, it will come. But I don't see the other stuff.
The study was the plan, the Heart of Fairfield plan. The zoning ordinance is an implementation.
Mhm.
It's a legislative act that implements land use regulations
Mhm.
that implement the Heart of Fairfield plan.
Right.
So our consultant team did, I mentioned there's a 2-year study period where we did just that, looked at options. But I will agree with you, it is still aspirational, and that's not a bad thing. The plans establishes a vision, a goal, an aspiration for the Heart of Fairfield plan.
Mhm.
The zoning ordinance helps implement that aspiration and goal.
Agreed. So maybe the other stuff that I haven't went all the way through yet gives me the entire study.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can certainly make sure you get a copy of the plan document if you don't already have one. So.
Brian, I had one question for you. One of your slides mentioned outdoor dining, and then it used the term activity zone. What did that mean?
Basically, on on Texas Street proper, the improved brick sidewalk area. That's basically the activity zone. The area nearest the street. On West Texas Street, where you might have a landscape strip, a sidewalk, and then the building. The activity zone would be the zone closer to the building, actually.
Okay, so that's a design feature?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look in your packet, one of the things that and I know there's a lot of detail in here to digest, one of the things that we made sure to provide you with was Chapter 4 from the Heart of Fairfield plan, which gives most of the direction for preparing the zoning. If you look on page 53 of your report packet, it's 53 of the packet, but it's page 65 of the plan. There is a description of various zones for regulatory purposes, and the activity zone is described there. It's described as the area between the sidewalk and a building reserved for landscaping, specialized events, outdoor restaurant seating, dining, recreation, and formal activities. So if you think of a wider sidewalk area, it's that sort of public area that isn't necessarily where people are walking, but it's where people are conducting activities, eating, just enjoying being in the downtown.
Okay. One other question I had. I know some jurisdictions, they're kind of doing things called parklets, which is kind of, blocking off parking in the street and having tables out there. That's not part of this, is it?
It could be.
Could be? Okay.
Less so on Texas Street proper, per se, because we already have a fairly well-developed downtown streetscape plan. But let me bear with me. But, for example, in some of our residential areas, on Broadway, for example, we could see the possibility of Broadway being transitioned from the wide 4-lane street that it is now to actually having a park run down the center, or parklets associated with residential development in the immediate. I should have had this pulled up. I apologize. All right. So yeah, Broadway, West Texas Street, possibly you could see that as well. Although the main thing the West Texas Street concept shows is bicycle lanes and improved pedestrian environments. That doesn't mean there are not going to be opportunities on West Texas Street to do a parklet type situation.
Yeah, as far as the zoning regulations go, this primarily focuses on what's happening on private property. I think the concept that you're looking at is something going on actually in the public right-of-way, and you'll see an individual parking space or several parking spaces that are either permanently or temporarily removed for certain activities. It's a separate item, separate from the zoning itself, and it's something that the city can consider. The key thing to balance, particularly in the downtown, we hear a lot of concerns that there isn't enough parking, and it's a question of working with the downtown association, determining and the businesses that those would be in front of. Do we want to be removing parking?
Right, but that's not a city program right now, where you come in and get a parklet permit or anything.
No, it's not
Okay.
a program, but it's certainly something that with implementing the Heart of Fairfield, we can consider as a program. It's just not a zoning action.
Right. Okay.
Again, this is more in the residential area. This is the Broadway concept. You can see where you've taken some of the street right away and turned it into some park space on the lower left-hand corner. That will, of course, require finding a developer partner. But so it's something we're not going to, that would be associated with a project. For example, the Semieto site, that's one of our opportunity sites we've identified. That'd be a great place. It's an entire block that could be transitioned to something with more green space rather than a 4-lane road that doesn't really need to be that long to carry that much traffic.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned when you're bringing the zoning changes to the city council, you'll also be bringing a package of proposed incentives.
Yes.
What are some of those that you're considering bringing to the council?
Well, I mentioned one that's already been adopted earlier, and that's a facade improvement grant program. That's for downtown. We're hoping to bring on board an actual architect to work with property owners to improve their facades. Some of the nicer existing simple facades downtown were already improved with a previous generation of that program, and we want to build upon that success. In the initial phase, the initial implementation phase, there are several things. One of the things that we were told by our consultants is we need to really look at how our fee programs work. There may be fees, our AB 1600 fees, for example, that are paying for new infrastructure that we really don't need to assess for a project downtown where all the streets and pipes and everything are already in place. So one of the earlier programs that I want to highlight that we're going to be doing is a fee study, a nexus study they call it. Another early program that we're looking at is public art. We've already done some public art. We lost a piece of public art. So there are opportunities downtown on sidewalks, on electric utility boxes, trash cans, etc., to kind of celebrate downtown and do through a public art program to develop a brand. That's one of the key things, key ideas in the Heart of Fairfield plan is to brand the Heart of Fairfield.
Yeah, and the incentive program, the implementation program hasn't been finalized yet, but what we can do is when that's ready, can give you a presentation on that so you understand what's in it.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, comments? Don?
Couple of things, Brian, not to throw an iron in your presentation, but can you go back to the slide in the presentation that just shows the actual color-coded definition of the area zones for the Heart of Fairfield plan, just so I can kind of see and correlate what these do a little more. In the meanwhile, I have a couple of clarifying questions, and one is I would encourage if, as a practice, as you're new on the commission, one of the things we might want to do is find a way to facilitate existing ongoing projects and getting them up to speed on stuff that's already been given to us and gone through. This is a perfect example of a project that's been going on for quite a few years, and there's been numerous town hall meetings and lots of different things to kind of come to this culmination of events. But like you, I sat here one year at the time and said, oh, going to the train station's another example. Things that go on that if we can get them up to speed, it helps the whole process overall. So
Sure.
whatever we can do to make that happen, I think would be good.
I agree with that, and I
Yeah.
think I'll reach out to our new commissioners and walk them through some of the big kinds of projects and plans that we have to make sure that they're up to
Yeah, we
speed
want them
and
to,
have
we
the
want
right
everybody to have
documents.
as much information as possible so we can make a good informed decision. And I know when I was new, I felt compelled to kind of just go with the flow rather than raise questions. So I think it's important to get as much information as we can on that.
Sure.
What happens with a business that sells? Let's say I've got John's AAA battery shop over there on West Texas, and I'm ready to retire and I want to sell my business, and this comes into play. Can I not sell my business now?
The non-conforming you could sell the business because the non-conforming use would transition to the new owner.
Okay, so that's important, I think, because they should be able to sell their business.
Yeah, just to clarify, the only thing that kills the ability to continue a non-conforming use or structure is abandonment of that use for either a year in the rest of the city, 90 days here in the Heart of Fairfield.
Okay.
Because I think that's a critical point. So if I have Joe's batteries, most likely I'll be selling it to another guy who wants to do Joe's batteries.
Right.
But if I sell it, he has 90 days to transition to some other business or some other type of thing, yes?
No.
Okay.
No, Joe's Batteries, it doesn't matter who owns the building, Joe's Batteries can continue as long as Joe's Batteries wants to continue.
And it doesn't have to
Even
be,
if Joe is in non-conformance based on the new
Correct.
plan.
Correct. It's if Joe's Batteries goes away, there's 90 days in which a similar kind of use could go in, or
And I
that
think-
kind of a use would be abandoned at that location.
I think the operative word there is similar, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a battery. It could be a smog shop, but it just has to be conforming to a similar business that was
Error.
being used in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same thing would go for a business office downtown. If it's a law office and then it becomes a CPA office, that still would be okay, right?
That's exactly
Yes.
correct.
That's within the broad categories in the zoning ordinance, yes.
Right, okay. Restaurants that, I love the idea of encouraging outdoor dining. However, that's a subjective opinion. The restaurants aren't going to be forced to do that, right? We're not talking about all of a sudden compelling restaurants to remodel their businesses in order to conform to an agenda.
No, this is for new restaurants.
Okay.
So again, the zoning ordinance applies to new stuff.
Right, right. I'm just making sure, clarification.
And one part of the incentivization plan or implementation plan that will be coming forward is programs to help
Right.
them do that.
Yeah. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the Heart of Fairfield plan, because when we started talking about this years ago, it was really about making our city a better defined place in the future, rather than slinging from the hip and making decisions just here and there based on what we think might be good today, rather than trying to build a long-term plan. So I think this is really good that we're moving in that. One of the concerns came up about just notifying the owners of these buildings, and I'm fairly certain we have a high percentage of non-occupied owner buildings throughout this footprint where the owners aren't even in our county.
True.
What measures have we taken to notify them so they're not surprised when the tenant says, hey, I'm leaving, and they come back in and realize they've got timelines and different zoning restrictions and things that they have to deal with?
We have notified full lists of all owners.
Okay.
And there have been several notices that went out, including one for the workshop that occurred before this public hearing, one that occurred before the public hearing, and then, of course, for the council action on the night in September, we'll do another notification of the entire mailing list. We can't guarantee that the mailing lists are completely up to date, but they're the best we have at this time. So, I mean, they're based on our GIS system. So hopefully we're catching everyone. And I'll be honest, there have been out-of-town owners that have called. So there are people that do respond to the notices we've given, and we try to assuage their concerns to the extent we can when we talk to them on the phone. So
I agree with our fellow commissioner in the sense that this is a very ambitious plan.
yes.
But I think the ambition really comes from time. I mean, local examples for us would be looking at downtown Vacaville and looking at downtown Benicia. One of the areas I think both of those downtowns are flawed is they are littered with tons of businesses downstairs that really prohibit the entertainment value that you get from visiting those downtown, where you're talking about 3 restaurants and 22 real estate offices, which
Yes.
I'm a realtor and I think that you should be able to do that, but at the same time, I'm not a big fan of that. So I think that while it might seem challenging to achieve these goals, I think in time, if we hold to it and we do things like build incentives for the developers to come in, and I could envision our downtown being a great destination for people to come, entertain, dine, hang out, and then have upstairs office space for those offices who want to be in a vibrant area, because if we take office out of downtown, we're going to lose all of our food, because that's what right now for sure what's supporting our food down there is the business segment of all of that. So I don't have any more questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, now open the public hearing. So far, I don't have any speaker cards. Would anybody like to speak on this item? You can bring it up. Thank you. Okay. Rhoda Chandler.
Rhoda Chandler, yes. So I made notes so I don't go off topic and waste your time. I'm a homeowner and a business owner here in downtown Fairfield, in the heart of Fairfield. And I've seen a lot of good things happening. We have a no smoking ordinance. We have gotten rid of these bins that were causing tremendous blight in our heart of Fairfield. And so I'm seeing, and I like the idea that the zoning ordinance is finally being seen as a tool to accomplish the goals in the Heart of Fairfield plan. I was one of the residents that participated, and so were many of my neighbors. And we did express concerns about a lot of things that were happening in our neighborhood that were related to the numbers of people that were now present at businesses that were formerly much smaller businesses. I've carefully reviewed the draft of the Heart of Fairfield plan, and I thank Dave and Brian for facilitating answering some of my questions. I did want to clarify, back to the map here in slide 18, it's my understanding that there will be an expansion in the HO zone to extend the commercial designation all the way to Delaware, when it previously only went to the alley, just for a short, I think it's from Pennsylvania over. Is that correct? Because I don't think that was clear.
Yes, that is what the map shows currently. There was an interest in providing some flexibility. Now, one caution, though, when you say the commercial zone, the HO zone is really not a retail commercial zone. It's a residential and office zone. So,
Okay. In reviewing this ordinance, you know, I'm an attorney. It was daunting trying to correlate the charts with the language in the ordinance, with the changes, with what was in place the last time. And I was speaking with other neighbors, and they really weren't even going to give it a try. So I worked with them to try and help them understand what was going to be changing. And so they did express some of their concerns to me, and I'm not speaking just for myself this evening. I have asked that zoning ordinances be used by the city for years to try and address some of the problems that are changing the character of our downtown zone. How many of the Planning Commission lives in the heart of Fairfield? And I want you to know that many of our city government leaders don't live in the heart of Fairfield. Many of them don't even live in Fairfield. But I live in the heart of Fairfield 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I also do business here every single day. I'm living every day with what's happening down here, unlike many of the people that are involved in planning. And it's important to me that the people that came to the Heart of Fairfield plan and participated and expressed our concerns, that our concerns be addressed in this plan. And I don't really feel that this draft covers our concerns. And I think that the reason for that
If you could wrap it up, that would be great.
is because there's a tremendous fear about RLUIPA, which is federal legislation that expresses concern about discriminating against churches. There is a way to draft an ordinance based on assembly size, where you limit the number of people that can be at any given land use location, so that you can have regulations where if something that was formerly an office with 2 or 3 people in it and maybe 12 people coming a day to do business is now having 50 people coming to assemble there, that's not an appropriate use for downtown.
If you could wrap it up, we'd appreciate it. Your time's up.
I would request that this ordinance as drafted not be approved, and that there be a larger effort to address the concerns that were raised by the people who put in their good time to give their opinions about what needed to be done.
And
Thank
Chair,
you.
if we could, I'm sorry, hold on. If we could just grant her some time to just finish. I'm curious about what else she has to say, and I think she represents a good side of what's happening out here, and so I'd like to hear.
I think some of the negative spillover effects that we have been seeing in primarily what will now be the HO zone, which are the blue zones that you see here, are effects that include businesses running from 4 a.m. in the morning with their tremendous traffic and employees and customers starting to appear at that time, businesses continuing till 10 p.m., increased noise, loitering, traffic violations, public intoxication, illegal parking, trespassing on private property.
Hold on. I'm sorry, but I think most of that falls within the ordinance of us to be able to put those kinds of restrictions on. Like, this zoning is a general plan in the sense, like we're just saying, hey, these will be permissible, but with each of that comes specifics towards what businesses and the operational aspect of those businesses and so forth, correct?
well, yes. I mean, plus, if they're city code violations or they're nuisance issues, I mean,
Right.
that can also be addressed through code enforcement.
Right, what I'm just saying is just because it's zoned, residential office doesn't mean any office can just have, there are restrictions within the kinds of offices, the size of offices, the times those offices can operate and so forth, correct?
Not explicitly.
Okay. So she's right where I could just go downtown and I could open up an office and just have an office from 11 p.m. till 6 in the morning and it be a business that makes a lot of loud noise.
Well, no, because the noise
Ordinance.
standards do
Okay.
apply still.
Yeah, it would be up to the residents to file a lawsuit
Gotcha.
to make a nuisance claim.
Or just complain.
Our position has always been that these things could be addressed through zoning by having certain assembly sizes allocated to certain zones. No one's suggesting that you ban churches. That's not what we were saying at all. We were saying that certain land uses that are producing large numbers of people drawing to very small, previously smaller used locations, there needs to be some kind of regulation to address that. Crime in the area has increased as a result of this influx of additional just people there. RLUIPA was never intended to prevent these kinds of zoning ordinances. It was drafted to prevent people from discriminating based on religion by saying this denomination cannot go there, or we're not going to let that school open there because Hasidic Jews always open schools in this neighborhood and we don't want it, so we're going to use zoning. It's not, that doesn't mean that we can't ever pass zoning laws that address assembly size in certain zones. And I would like to see the ordinance try and address some of that. Planning tools are one of the most powerful tools a city has to foster a character in a city and to attract business and ensure stability of a location to a proposed use and ensure that the needs of the people are addressed and there's a balance between the rights of location use, land use, and the rights of citizens.
Your point has been made. Thank you. I
very
appreciate you being here.
Next, we have Bud Tonneson.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. I commend all of you for taking the time to get up here and listen to all this. This is quite a packet to look at and to make a decision, in my opinion, in one meeting. My main concerns are parking. Even today, parking is a problem in downtown Fairfield. I see where page 47, the parking projects, you refer to 1 space per residential unit, 1 space per every 10 room for guest parkings. And then you get down to up to 50% parking spaces may be replaced by bicycle parking. To me, this strikes as, what is the density if you're considering parking spaces by bicycles and reducing 50% of the...
Code, or is this in the plan document?
It's on page 47, what you gave me. But also, you got different page numbers. Confusing me. And where's all the parking sites in the city of Fairfield?
If I might clarify one thing though before, and I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. I think you're.
The section that you're referring to on page 30 of the packet is in the existing code. That's not being changed. So that is not being modified.
Yeah, to clarify, that's a section of code that applies citywide that is not a part of the heart of Fairfield. There's a separate change on that page, I think.
What is the total
Oh,
density
that page
of
is
this
included
project?
because there's simply a change to the numbering within that section. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not proposed. That's not a proposed change for you tonight.
Yeah.
Can we skip to what is the total density of this project for parking?
It's going to vary depending on the specific uses, the unit type, etc. There's not one number I can give you.
So you might have one number for, you mentioned high density in a certain area, and I think
Right. For example, a particular kind of business would have one particular kind of parking requirement. A single-family home would have a different parking requirement than a studio apartment. It's going to vary. It's going to vary across the land uses and building types.
So you have no density for this whole project? Parking?
I don't understand.
Yeah, it be. Parking is tied to whichever land uses and developments come in, and until we know specifically what would occur and what kind of a building would be built, you can't know exactly what kind of parking requirements there would be. It's the same anywhere in the city, so to forecast that today would be a guess. It wouldn't be a specific number.
But, you know, you referred to churches, like Rhoda did, are not permitted in almost all zones, but then you go down to, I think someone made a comment, parking is not a dominant issue in this project, but in churches not allowed in HTD zone? Is that
Correct. Yes, that's the
and then
proposal.
you say that they are allowed in I might have this wrong, CD zones, except on the second floor?
On the second floor in the HCD.
Now, do you consider that on, I would assume on Sunday, the churches would be there? Would they take up a lot of parking spaces? I mean, a lot of days, on Sundays, a lot of people go shopping, especially in a place where you would like to have people come to, a place you want to go to, as you say in this thing. And one other thing.
Given the limited number of second floor spaces in the HCD zone, you're not going to see a large number of churches in that zone. So the overall impact on overall parking counts should not be a significant issue.
So you really don't have a number for the churches, and that's not considered in this.
Well, no. I mean, like Mr. Feinstein said, to an extent they're reviewed on an individual case-by-case basis, and we can't come up with a single number. There is a minimum number of parking spaces required for churches in the code, and that will be applied as well. But we cannot predict how many parking spaces will be taken up by churches because we do not know how many churches are going to come into the downtown core.
Do you have any other questions for staff?
I'll close here.
Okay, thank you.
My big question is parking. Where are the parking sites? And is the city going to purchase these sites? Or will someone, a business person, come in and buy the sites? And if not, do you consider using eminent domain to purchase these sites?
That's several questions, and I'll try to answer them. Parking in downtown will continue to be primarily based on a couple things. There are existing municipal parking lots. The Heart of Fairfield plan calls for improvement, landscaping, lighting, security, etc. In those existing municipal parking lots. There's also street parking. The Heart of Fairfield plan calls for doing pilot projects in the south downtown area, for example, where we investigate the use of angled parking. That also increases the yield of parking. For larger properties, for larger projects, both the Heart of Fairfield and West Texas Street, there's still a requirement to provide some off-site parking on-site. So the developer of a larger project, for example, so if Semieto were developed, the entire 2 acres were developed for residential, that developer would have to provide some on-site parking to meet the residential needs. So that's kind of the way we do it with any project. There are certain minimum parking standards, and on a project-by-project basis, that's how we handle it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I commend you guys taking on this project.
All right, thank you. I have no other speaker cards. Are there any other public comments? We'll now close the public hearing. Oh. Come on up.
My microphone is on. This is as loud as it gets. Okay. I'm sorry. We'll check with the technical side of things after the meeting.
Okay. Stan Hardwick. Go ahead.
For your time.
Right.
My question pretty quick. My wife and my brother and I, we used to own some property on Pennsylvania and Alaska Avenue, and there was an eminent domain. It was pulled on the property, and we ended up giving in to it. We couldn't fight it anyway. But our property now is located in this area where it's a CMRH, RVM, and we have no idea that they're going to pull eminent domain. That's all we want to know.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, his question was whether the city was planning any eminent domain proceedings against your property. Is that basically it? Yeah.
We've had that happen to us before. When sure, because like I said, on the zoning there on the paper that we received, our area is like all in black and everybody else in this nice gray and all stuff like that. I'm like, okay, something's happening to us, and we're not sure if that's what's going on.
Well, eminent domain isn't a part of this, and you know, that's a whole separate legal proceeding, but this isn't part of this at all.
Okay, so so again, just the area that we're looking out here is really dark. We have nothing to worry about that then.
No, not with this zoning plan,
Yeah,
no.
you answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Now I will close the public hearing. I'll turn it back to the commission for any further questions and deliberations.
I just want to ask if the commission feels comfortable enough to make a decision on this evening, having not had the history of understanding everything. I know we got quite a packet, and there's a lot of information in there to have been studied, but I just want to, this is a pretty critical zoning ordinance that we're going to be put forward, so if we have to postpone it, I certainly would be okay with that, making sure that you guys have enough information to get up to speed. And you may. I just want to make sure that that's an option.
If I may.
Go ahead.
I was actually going to ask that this be put over. This was a huge amount of information to absorb from Thursday or Friday when we got the packet for something we have not, at least speaking for myself, have not been involved with. There's a lot of questions that people have raised. I have this whole thing here that I have, that I was given when I came on the commission that I haven't had a chance to read yet. I'd like to have some more understanding on it. I have a question regarding that whole 90-day period. Going back to the West Texas portion, that we're talking about the automobile repair areas. If I'm correct to understand, and I'm just going to use a general muffler shop, goes out of business, they lose their tenant. They only have 90 days to get another like tenant, and they can never reopen again after 90 days?
Correct.
That's a very short period of time.
Right. But there is wiggle room written into the ordinance. And I don't know, Casey, if you want to, if there's unusual circumstances, and if the owner maintains the property and is actively marketing the property, and the director of the community development director agrees that it's not through his direct fault that he's not been able to re-tenant it within the 90 days, we can extend it.
If the use has not been abandoned, if the owner can show that they are making efforts to continue the use, then it wouldn't be considered abandoned.
Yeah,
that would be the circumstances.
If the property is completely abandoned and there's weeds and
So it's
boarded
a
up,
case-by-case situation in that situation.
Yes, we built that into the 90-day thing.
Okay.
So if just tag onto that, because I want some clarification, if that were to happen, and because you suggested that if the, I don't know who you said, believes that it was abandoned or isn't doing that, and all of a sudden we say, nope, can't do it, what's the recourse that owner has? Can they come to the commission? Can they come to the council and say, hey, this has happened, I'm trying to do this, and we can override that, right?
Yes, they can appeal the decision.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion that we put this over, and then when we bring it back, I would ask that be changed from 90 days to 6 months, cutting the 1-year current statute in half, or ordinance in half.
Well, there's a motion on the floor. Do any other commissioners have any other questions or comments?
I do have a comment. I'd like to amend the motion, not necessarily in reference to the nonconformance period, but in reference to the session Commissioner and I need in reference to bringing us up to speed on the entire Heart of Fairfield plan. That's connected to it. So not just to put it over, but we need a session where we sit down and spend a couple hours or whatever. Now, I have the same big packet, and I've trudged through the big packet, but the fundamental things that are coming out here, we don't have enough of a knowledge base, in my opinion, to make an intelligent decision. I think overall the plan sounds good, but I want to be, this thing goes on for 10, 15 years. This is going to change Fairfield, and it's a big thing. And I'm not prepared to vote on this big thing yet until I get more data. So I'd like a tutorial, for lack of another term, before we have a vote on this issue.
I think the caveat there would also be, just as a comment, that amendments will happen, opportunities for amendments will occur. We have the opportunity to request amendments. throughout the process, even if we take action tonight on that. So, like as an example, I'm strongly in favor of moving forward with the project because I think that we've done a terrific job getting to where we are. There are absolutely questions that still need to be answered and issues and so forth that will be defined, I think, as time permits. But at this point, it's also a very ambitious plan, so it's not the effects it's going to start to make when it does take effect are going to be minimal at first, compounded certainly over time, but we'll have a chance to amend those, make decisions, and so forth. Again, I'm not dismissing that we want to roll this over, but I'm just saying, like, you know, there's been a lot of time and investment put into getting us to this point as we are now, and I think we have to respect staff because that's what they do every day. To your question about the 90 days, I'm not so much in favor of 6 months or 90 days. I just like to know where that comes from. Is it just we said 90 days, or is there maybe some particular case study that says, oh, in the past or other cities or other areas this has worked and 90 days is an appropriate number, but it's not going to cause alarm or an issue. I don't want to just say 6 months because that might be a problem. I just think that we need to find either a clarification or get something that just defines that. And you may have done that homework already. Again, I give the respect to the city because I trust the developers and the staff to do the right thing and bring to us, you know, when you're recommending something that we approve, that you've done that homework.
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, in the 90 days, there's not a study. It's a discretionary choice. The Planning Commission has a choice to recommend to the City Council what that period is. The City Council has the choice to decide what that period is. There's not a study behind it. It's simply a number that's picked to say, within this area, because we have a very detailed plan that the city has said, this is what we want to see, and not some other things in this area. The idea was to propose a time that is a more rapid period than our current code. Could it be 6 months? It could be 6 months. Ultimately, it's a question, you know, for the Planning Commission to debate. If the item gets continued, the question that staff would have is there specific information that you need in order to make a decision on the items that are in front of you, or is there issues that could be that you're aware of now that you perhaps would like to discuss and debate amongst yourselves? But staff would always be looking for, is there more information that you specifically need to help you make that decision?
Right,
Yeah,
so
Perry, go ahead.
hold on.
Well, one of the key issues that was raised tonight was the assembly size. You know, that does seem to be a good way to monitor, like she said. If you've got a business that has 5 people coming a day and all of a sudden you got 300 people there, you know, that has completely changed the whole nature of what's going on.
But building codes will address that kind of dramatic change. Because if you got 300 people, it's a different kind of occupancy, and that's the primary way we would deal with the larger churches that are coming in.
So that is something you're aware of, and also, I mean, it appears to me that that is kind of a change that we could implement if we find there is a problem, if we move forward with this now. I mean, my concern, I agree with Don, this has been going on a long time, and we got to start somewhere, and that is flexible. I mean, that's the important thing, right?
Our current plan is 365 days?
Yes.
So I'm probably in favor of 6 months, just because that cuts what we currently have in half. But 90 days from a realtor seems pretty quick to find a definitive answer to a replacement tenant and or business. And so I'd like to be able to give them that opportunity to not have to stress on it and be able to have a plan in place. And certainly I think if there's no plan in place within 6 months that we can that we know is going to be taken action on, I think that we should have the opportunity to be able to move forward. So I would be in favor of a 6 month.
Jesse?
Just 90 days.
Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to commend the staff. This is a tremendous amount of work. And just from my point of view, from looking at this and going through this, it's time consuming. This plan has been in the works for a long, long time. And I feel that it's time to move forward. There will be times for amendments, there will be times for changes, but as mentioned before, we have to start someplace. And as far as the 90 days, make a suggestion to city council for 6 months. I think city council is the one that probably will set the time limit on whether it's 90 days, 6 months, or whatever. But I think what's before us tonight is the new ordinance, and what we see in the new ordinance and the changes. It's up to this commission to make a decision whether we want to go forward with it or set it back. I'm highly in favor of moving forward.
Well, there's a motion on the floor right now.
I'll second the motion.
Yeah, well, the motion is to continue it.
The original motion that
Right.
Cone made was to continue it. I'll second the motion with the 6-month extension that was added in there as well.
And we should probably continue it to a date certain. If that's the, how much time would you want? To the
I think it's
next
important
meeting?
to also have the session we mentioned. This sounds great. The staff has done a lot of work. Everyone on the commission who has seen this and been part of the work says it sounds good, but there's still 30% of the commission who is literally seeing this within these last 3 weeks. So I think it's very important for us to get up to speed. Now, again, I can read, he can read, right? But what we need is that session that everyone has been privy to, all of the discussions. We can't get all the discussions, but I would like some time with staff, at least an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, where we can do a deep dive and come out of the woods saying, okay, I get it. And yes, it does make sense, and I feel I've done due diligence to make a decision this important. I wouldn't want to walk in and make this decision, and this is my second meeting.
So you'd like an individual meeting with staff, but you're not suggesting that we have another study session up here?
No, I'm
Okay.
just suggesting for my fellow commissioner, this is our third meeting, my second meeting.
Right.
And we're about to make a critical vote, in my opinion, and I don't feel I have enough data.
If I understand, we can call and come in and schedule some time with you guys if we so want to discuss a project or an agenda anytime, right?
Anytime.
Yeah. So you're free to do that without putting it in an agenda or anything. You could just contact them and say, hey, and schedule some time to come in. So the real issue is right now is not to step in here, but whether or not we're going to approve the motion to carry it forward or act or not, or whether or not that motion moves forward or not really is really what the discussion is.
Right, and so there's a motion right now to continue it, and it should be to a meeting certain, and there's no meeting certain yet. Is the next meeting, is that part of your motion? The next regularly scheduled meeting?
I would say within the next 30 days, next 2 meetings is fine. Whatever works. I don't know what's on the next agenda.
Yeah, that agenda hasn't been scheduled yet. Your next meeting is scheduled for September 13th, I believe it is. It's the second Wednesday in September.
I again would only just urge that rather than put a kink in the process, which has already been going for 2+ years, there's nothing that's going to stop us or keep us from adding amendments or changing or moving forward or discussing or bringing on the agenda any specific items of this project that we want to amend in the future moving forward. So I would think that we could move forward this evening, it's just my opinion, be able to move forward and you still get your education process completed and then bring those agendized items back to the next meeting, 2 meetings, 7 meetings from now and be able to say, hey, I have concerns about this, I'd like to have a discussion and get it on an agenda and then we can act on that and amend this as we move forward. I just think I feel pretty strongly that it would be a little bit, as Jesse said, just to stop the process that's been moving forward for so long. Because if we get into that habit, then we may never get anything done.
Well, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to stop the process. I just want to be informed, and I don't feel I can vote tonight not being informed. Staff has done a great job in this, and I commend you on that. It's just we have not had the time to be informed to make a decision tonight. And I understand that the importance of this going into the future, and I want to make sure that the decision I make is an informed decision.
All right, well, right now, the motion is to continue to September 13th. All in favor? Opposed? No. So another motion?
Was that two? There was 2 in favor and 4
4
opposed.
opposed. I'll make a motion that we move forward with the resolution and adopt resolution recommending City Council amend this Fairfield zoning ordinance to bring into consistency with the Heart of Fairfield plan. Resolution also recommends a zone change to assign appropriate zoning for the Heart of Fairfield plan area.
And that includes the change on the,
Yeah, with the
Well-
change from 90 days to 6 months.
6 months.
Sorry, let me make sure that's
And
clear.
and the additional minor changes that were given to you tonight on your,
Correct.
and that's a non-conforming use period of 90 days?
It would be 6 months.
Okay. All right. There's a motion, a second? All in favor? Yes. Opposed? Motion passes 4-2. All right. Director's report. Dave, do you have any items for the director's report?
Yeah, I have a couple of items. First thing I'd like to do is to just point out in the audience and introduce you just briefly to Laura Sneidman. Laura Sneidman, I don't believe he is anymore in attendance. Yeah. 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 So I'd like to introduce to you Laura Sneidman. She is the city's assistant city manager, and in Carl Dumas's with his retirement, she is currently serving as the interim director for community development.
You see how excited they are to welcome you?
So I wanted to just point her out here in the audience. Couple of other items, or one other item. We do have a couple of fairly large items for you that we expect to come to you in September. Our agendas are not finalized yet, but you've seen members here in the audience for the 1500 Oliver, the mixed-use project. We do expect at a meeting in September that to be on your agenda. It is not official yet, but I do want to prepare you that that's an item that you could see. Staff will reach out to you to make sure, as with this item in advance, because it's a fairly large item with a lot of details and a lot of controversy, staff will actually reach out to you specifically to make sure that if you have questions, concerns, that we understand what those are and that you're able to understand what the issues are. So we'll reach out to you specifically.
All right. Thanks.
I have a question on that. Since you brought that up, and I know that's a hotbed topic in the city of Fairfield, on something like that, I realize the staff report is not officially done until the Thursday before. Is there any way to get any type of a draft staff report or draft information so we can do some background on that prior to receiving the packet we receive?
Yeah, we won't have a draft for you. What we can do is we can get the plans out to you.
That would be wonderful.
And
Just so we can get educated.
I'll work with the project planner to get a copy of plans out to you next week so that you have a chance to digest visually what is it that's being proposed.
Thank you.
So that I can do.
That'd be good.
I did have some additional information which I'll bring to you at your next meeting. Commissioner Walker had asked for some information on school planning over in Cordelia. Because he's not here, I'll hold off and provide that report next time.
Okay.
That's it.
Thanks. Do any commissioners have any information items?
I know several of us went to Chief Fenn's swearing in. I was very impressed that like every mayor and chief of police in every city in Solano County and a lot of other counties were there. Or must have been at least 300 people there, so it's very nice. And Brian appears last time we saw you had your arm in a sling. So hopefully you're doing better. You seem to be.
It's getting better. It's still 3 more weeks.
Brian mentioned.
I can tie my tie today.
Oh,
He mentioned he wasn't able to easily get his coat on for the meeting. I said,
that's all right.
don't want
I'm
you
glad
to
to see
hurt
you're
your
doing
arm
better.
in advance of the meeting.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners have any information items? All right. Well, we're adjourned till September 13th, 2017. Thank you. Okay.